Have you ever considered what your business legacy might be? You've been working hard in your business, you have a dream and a vision and goals. What if you went to the end game and worked backwards to really uncover why you're doing this? What's the legacy you can leave? That's what we're going to talk about today. Your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello and welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host, and very excited about today's show. Talk about something a little different this week, and I think it's really important because it gives business owners and people in general a direction and a target to shoot for that really can help them expand and increase the success that they're having. I'm going to bring in an expert in that regard, and his name is Paul Adio, and he is a wealth advisor at Innovative Advisory Group. Paul brings over 2 decades of strategic and financial leadership to his team through innovation, collaboration, and technology. Paul's clients are business owners who need a fresh perspective on strategic thinking, leadership, and change management. Paul's team of advisors work to provide risk analysis not just from a member's perspective, but also from a business and life perspective. As an avid reader and continual learner, Paul's unique skill of listening for what's not being heard and asking the question that hasn't been asked has helped propel his clients to more clarity in their life, in addition to providing financial oversight and guidance for his clients. Addicted to improvement, not only in his professional craft, but in all areas of his life, you might find him working on his mountain biking skills, his approach to parenting, fitness, and mindfulness. Paul's constant need for improvement is fueled by the ability to develop leadership for his family, his clients, and those he cares for. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome. Thank you so much for the introduction.
You're so welcome. And I love bringing in financial people who have more going on than just sort of, an interest in numbers. And so I love the fact that you do the personal development work as I do. And I think that is so important. And it's so important because money is also much more than numbers. It's a relationship we have, as I talk about all the time on this show. It's emotional. It's, there are psychological aspects to it. And so it's very important that people understand the broader perspective of how people make decisions and how people, take action and what's behind all that. So I'd love if you could give us a little background as to how you got into this, why you do this, and we're going to talk a little more about relationships with money and building a business legacy after that.
Definitely. So as a backstory, my parents grew up in the Philippines. They didn't actually meet until they migrated to America. And part of that American dream was to have the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, kids go to college, and everything is sunshine and rainbows. My mom was more of the breadwinner growing up, and my dad was kind of the blue collar worker. And at the time that I was born, there was this newspaper ad, which advertised essentially the birth of different children throughout the city. And a New York Life agent, out of all people, decided to look at the newspaper ad and send birthday cakes to each one of the mothers at their doorsteps. And so at that point, the moment I was born, my mom decided, I don't know necessarily what this is all about, but I know that if one of us pass away, that I want to be financially taken care of. So fortunately and unfortunately, when I was at the age of 11, my dad passed away. And so at the time I was 11, my sister was 17. We had no idea what was going on. We didn't deal with this at all. And so what ended up happening is there was this gentleman who helped us walk through that process of loss and grief. And what ended up happening is, my mother working a job, not making more than $60,000 a year, was able to push through and put us through college. And
Wow.
so both me and my sister had very, very minimal student debt. And that kind of stuck with me throughout my career and deciding what I wanted to do. So I grew up as an introverted kid, not really uh, needing to meet many people, I felt awkward. And I ended up really getting into computers and systems and innovation and things like that. And so I discovered my curiosity for figuring out how to work with people, but also work with technology and understand information. And so, like many others, I needed to figure out, okay, what are my skill sets when I was younger? And I discovered that I was really thoughtful about processes. I was really thoughtful about listening to people. And it wasn't so much about learning a particular product, it was more so about empathizing with people. And so I ended up becoming the youngest manager graduating out of college for Staples Corporation. And I was the youngest person in the room. I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew is that it was a challenge and that I needed to know this inside and out. I wasn't good at sales, so I started in sales. I wasn't good at ops, so I started and then I transitioned it over to ops. And then I slowly but surely found my way just trying to understand business and the mindset and what it takes to run a business. And what I soon discovered was that I did have a knack for it. And I remember it like it was yesterday. This was September 2010, 2000, actually 2009. I was working 6 days a week leading up to my wedding, 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. And I go to my fiance and she essentially tells me, you got to do something else because it wasn't working. Just she saw a lot more potential in me and I give her a lot of credit for it. So I decided, okay, let's interview my mom's financial advisor and figure out what made him really thrive, what made him really successful. And he told me a few things. He said, the first 5 years are going to be the most difficult part of your life. But then the next five, and then the 10, and then the 15, it's probably going to be the most satisfying thing that you'll ever do because you'll find people that were in your mom's situation and to see the both of us go through college with one income through tragedy came through triumph. And so that kind of inspired me to go in the financial services industry and kind of understand the human dynamic and the money dynamic because, I feel as though I'm standing on the shoulders of giants and I wanted to impact people in the same way. So I've been in the industry for now 11 years, and I can honestly say that with full intention, finances is my passion. But in actuality, being a financial advisor was allowed me to reverse engineer being a dad. And
Mm.
so it actually bought back time that I didn't have with my dad. And so now I'm living in the phase of goal in life where I actually can recall the same instances, the same behaviors, same things that I used to do with my dad, and I'm living it today. And so I'm just extremely grateful to be at this point. So
Wow, that was
yeah,
beautiful. Thank you.
yeah.
There was a lot in there as you were speaking. I'm picking up on a lot of different things. One of the things I just want to point out is it is often, maybe you'll agree that it was a good thing to be with Staples to start because sometimes I think, we're eager to kind of get past that initial job. But when you work for a large company, initially you do learn a lot about business. You learn a lot about yourself and what you're good at and what you're not even interested in. And so, I think for a lot of people, they want to, especially these days, kind of want to skip over that, kind of corporate level job, and it has a lot of value to it that you can then take with you later.
Hmm.
And the other thing that I thought was great was you interviewing the wealth advisor that you knew and that's another thing. If you see something out there that's potentially interesting to you as a career option, it's kind of brave to go ask to just sit down and talk to them, but it's just such a great thing to do. So yeah, I commend you for taking that step. It's recommended to a lot of people in career transition, and not that many people actually do it. So that was a good move. So talk to me a little about, since you are kind of coming at this from a heart-centered place, really, and it is a passion of yours. What are you seeing? What did you notice about your own relationship with money? Some of the money beliefs that you had, and how that impacted the work you do.
I think part of it is, especially when you have parents that are from a third world country and who literally, like, we talk about our parents like, oh, they don't know what it's like to have internet, but imagine having parents that don't have running water.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I discovered kind of through the whole process is that I noticed that my mom thought in a different way. She thought she didn't think in terms of years, she thought in terms of decades. And so she would be very meticulous about where she allocated her resources and where she allocated her time. And what I mean by that is I grew up having these different experiences, whether it was going to Europe or going to travel, and seeming as though that was a normal thing to do. And you would think that, okay, uh, this is a white collar life. It really wasn't. It was a product of her being really strategic with her money, and it really taught me, one, delayed gratification,
Mm.
and then also two, there is a difference between spending money and then creating a life experience. And those life experiences really resonated with me. On top of that, the reason why I was so curious about being an advisor was understanding, one, not only the behaviors that made the client successful, but two, recognizing the habits and behaviors that didn't make them successful.
Mm.
So throughout the first 3 years of my career, I did over 1,500 interviews. And part of those interviews was understanding uh, what exactly what you just asked. What is your relationship with money? What is the best financial decision you've ever made? What is the worst financial decision you've ever made? So I actually use my profession as a vehicle to understand good behavior and bad behavior. And what I was really lacking was more so, okay, I have all these skills. How to apply it to my life? How do I understand the difference between an asset and a liability? And it's still shifting to this day. It's
Right.
still shifting to the clients that I interview. It's still shifting to the business owners that I interview and I work with. So it's ever evolving. But the thing that I've learned the most is that the abundance and the scarcity mindset can both serve you in a short-term positive way or a long-term detrimental way. And it's all dependent on, one, what type of relationships do you surround yourself with, and two, what is your clear intention for the end game? So
Yeah, well, you bring up that term end game. So, how important is it to look ahead and kind of visualize where you want to be, or what you want to, leave as a legacy, for example,
yep.
to this process? Because a lot of people are kind of churning along, not necessarily really trying to stop and visualize that end game. It's also a tough one for people to do. I think so. What have you found with that?
You found you bring up a good point. From what I've discovered is most people start a business because they want freedom, but in actuality, they end up having responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've created somewhat of a leveraged job
Yeah.
where everybody needs their time, attention, resources, and everything else. And it feels extremely good. The problem with the clients that I work with and the business owners that I've seen is that usually when they're at a point where they want to sell their business, they're not transitioning to something, they're transitioning away from something.
Mm,
So over the last 2 years, it's been more so, or 3 years, It's been more so about the dynamics of work culture have changed. It's hard to find good people that are, going to work for you for 10, 20 years, or the overall marketplace has just shifted where that work from home is the only option, and they don't know how to lead in today's culture. And so you often run into situations where they probably should have sold their business 2, 3 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and they're just holding on primarily because they don't know what to do afterwards. They
Right.
don't know how to find that sense of contribution, that sense of community, that sense of self-worth, because their business is their identity.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And so if you know that kind of next chapter after the business, and maybe the business is what allows you, to do the contributing or to live that next chapter, whatever that is. Yeah, you do come to kind of a dead stop, and that's never good. That's actually pretty emotionally challenging when people do that. Uh, so so how do you lead them through that? Do you help them to visualize? Do you ask questions? How do you get there?
Yeah, so part of it is understanding the elements that they can live with and they can live without. And it's an iterative process. It's not a I'm going to be the ranger at the golf course tomorrow, the minute that I retire. It's all about the transition in between. So oftentimes when we have owners that we're working with, it's um trying to figure out how to slowly let go of the elements of the business, but rather than letting go of the elements and then taking on more work, intentionally creating white space in their life.
Hmm.
And what I mean by white space is things such as being in nature, things such as, golfing, things where they can truly just empty their mind and be in a flow state at that point. And until then, um, same thing with when I recommend with clients is if they're planning on making a big transition or move, there's a certain way to test it out. So I had a client that wanted to move to Maui, probably about half a decade ago, and I said, "Do you really? Let's try this out." So rather than ripping off the band-aid, selling all your real estate property, let's just rent an Airbnb for a month and see how it goes. So she did that, ended up doing it, and she came back and she said, "Paul, I was miserable."
Wow.
So she said, I was bored out of my mind. And she realized that Maui was a great place to go. And it was a good place to get away from some of her worries. But when you have the same weather every single day, 24/7, 365, it ends up just making her a little bit crazy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would say the key is uh, test tracking your transition, letting go of different elements of the business, and then rather than filling up time to do more business, really sit with yourself and listen to yourself and understand what are some of the things that really bring me joy. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. And so when people come to you and talk to you about these things, have you found some stumbling blocks with respect to their relationship with money? They either have belief systems or thoughts or ideas that just don't align with what you're trying to help them do. And maybe a couple examples of those.
Yeah, I'll actually go into uh so there's two phases of that. I'll go into one, different segments of or different amounts of money that I've recognized, but then also different story types. So the first one, I'll go into different segments. This doesn't have to do with all people. This is what I've experienced. So typically, the person that is about to retire that has $500,000 to $2 million in assets, the number one thing that they are afraid of, and most people are afraid of, is running out of money.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not their fault because they've worked. These are the people that worked for GE for 40 years, that have a pension, that have some type of security. These people need to, the hardest thing for them is to, one, quantify their freedoms. So all they know is scarcity. They do not know abundance. This is the person that has $2 million saved up and is only spending $30,000 a year. This is the person that, still has the plastic on the couch, or, that still saves the ketchup packets and napkins and everything else. So actually, the thing that they need the most is they need to write down all the things that that they would remove them from guilt, because they've been guilted into spending money. And so what we have to do is we have to uncover where that guilt comes from, and then we have to quantify it. We have to start slow. We can't just say, okay, we're going to take a $40,000 vacation trip. We may start off with a tenth of that. And then as they start to experience more and more of that, then it becomes, okay, now it's exciting. Now they're looking forward to spending more of that money, because now they know they're okay. They just need someone to say that there is hope, that they get me, and that they're going to be okay. Because everybody else, think about it in this way, everybody else has been telling them that they can spend their money, but they are successful. They're in the situation that they're in because of their discipline, because of their delayed gratification. So you have to almost grieve that type of person, and then highlight the benefits of actually putting their money into the experiences that they want.
Right.
Because the greatest tragedy that you could have with your money is not doing anything significant with your life. And so the $500,000 to 2 million, from what I've seen, it's more so quantifying freedoms and understanding where to spend money. Now let's go to the second tier.
I just have to say that was a profound point that you made about the biggest mistake that you can make with your money is to not live your life. So yeah, very important.
The second tier is the 2 million to 10 million. And obviously this fluctuates from 2 to 10 million. These, from my experience, these are the serial entrepreneurs. These are the people that have a big exit. These individuals signed up for the love of the game, for building a company from scratch, from building value to other people at scale. And what ends up happening in that situation is they get to a point where they exit, and that is completely removed. And so let's say you have a founder who was a software engineer. They built this company from, 0 to 100 million annual recurring revenue. They are now at the point where maybe they're prepping for IPO, and it's just compliance work. It's just, how do I be the face of the company? How do I do all these different things? And what ends up happening is they get this exit, and they take off their build value hat, and then they put on their consumer hat. And now this is the most money they've ever had in their life. And they're trying to search and look for how they should spend their money, because it's extremely hard when I'll say it in context, but it is hard when you have a large lump sum of money in the bank account, especially with everything going on with the banking system and everything, and not be able to sleep properly. It's all about preservation. How much is this going to last? And when in actuality, these people end up losing touch of the relationships that they grew up with. And this is not necessarily on purpose. It's just more so the dynamic. Like, imagine your high school friends, everybody goes to their high school reunion, and all of a sudden, all over the newspaper, Michelle, you're worth $100 million. So let's go out to eat. Well, let's go out to eat. So who's going to pay for dinner? If you pay for dinner, who is this big shot, paying for dinner thinking that they're better than us? If you don't pay for dinner, who is this big shot thinking that they don't pay for dinner? Like, that's offensive. So there are these little nuances of and burdens behind wealth that you just have to wrestle with, because the larger the dollar amount, the bigger the echo chamber.
Hmm.
And so from the 2 to 10 million, in actuality, these people need to rediscover who they were, what values they were brought up with, and then understand that it's about building, it's not about consuming. And so oftentimes you'll find these people selling all their material things and starting from scratch just so that they can have that sense of feeling of beginning again. So, yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. I like the way you broke it down into those financial
Yeah.
categories.
And the last one, which is 10 million plus, is this is more of the old type of money, like the generational wealth type of money. Uh, the thing that these people need the most is to be around people that are fulfilled that don't have any money. Think undercover boss that goes in and sees that people are actually happy at their work and they take pride in their work, rather than being around other multi-billionaires. They actually need to be centered and anonymous around people that just enjoy life, that are
Hmm.
fulfilled. And
Hmm.
so there are some situations where I've had other advisors work with clients where they would just set up day with normal Joe, the plumber, and have a day where you're not competing against who bought the most expensive car or who had the African safari for 200,000, but then the next person had it for 300,000.
Hmm.
So these types of individuals, they don't necessarily have to rely on community. If I needed to borrow someone's lawnmower, I would knock on my neighbor's door and say, "Hey, can I borrow your lawnmower because mine's broken?" But for them, because they have so many resources, they don't have anyone telling them the truth, because nothing's that's everybody that's serving them has something at stake. Either this person's paying me or enabling me or whatnot. So in those types of cases, one, it's being able to surround themselves with people of humility and fulfillment, but two, also be able to not be yes to death. Someone needs to actually tell them the truth about what's actually going on. So,
Very interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a unique perspective on it, and I don't think everybody kind of takes that into consideration when they think about people, which of course we're stereotyping when we think about people in these categories. So, yeah, that's great. Um, okay, so let's kind of go back. I think that's first of all, it's a really good explanation of how nuanced this whole relationship with money is, and again how it doesn't. It's not about how much you have, because that relation you have of this relationship with money, and it can be dysfunctional or it can be good in any income category, regardless of how much money you have in the bank at this moment.
Yep.
So, good thing to remember. So, when thinking about building the legacy, you start with kind of, what would you like at down the road, and then you talked about reverse engineering things. So, for people thinking about this, especially the people who are kind of thinking, maybe they're a little defeatist. They already are thinking, I could never get to my end game. I mean, as a financial wealth advisor, how do you kind of get people to participate in this who are maybe not doing it that easily?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I love that you had mentioned there's the dollar amount, but then there's also the behavior and the mindset. So along with this, I've discovered kind of the six story types
Mm.
of people. So I'll go over story type one. Story type one is a wishful thinker. This is the person that is agreeable, happy, is open to every opportunity and conversation. Maybe a phenomenal person, but they're actually allergic to making decisions. So this wishful thinker, cross your fingers, is just very open and amenable, but when it comes time to making decision, their favorite saying is, "It'll all work out in the end."
Yeah,
Right?
that's great.
So that's the first story type. The second story type is internal conflict. Think about a flywheel. where this person, everything is everything's on fire. Where what about the neighbors that I live next to? Um what about this problem and that problem? They come up with 8 different blocks for why they can't make a decision. And internally, just as a person trying to genuinely help, I convince myself and say, okay, if I only just prioritize 1 through 8, one by one, extremely slowly, then they will get it. But what ends up happening is I go 1 through 8, and then once you finish prioritization 8, they come up with the 9th, 10th, and 11th reason. So internal conflict is the habit or behavior of not making a decision, but having other excuses in a way to make that decision. Then there's the third type, which is natural transition. Natural transition is think we are doing this because this is the stage in life that we need to do this. So I am, turning 27. It's time for me to get married. I am turning 30. It's time for me to have kids. It's time to have a house. So natural transition looks good on paper, but what actually ends up happening is you're filling this void by whatever everybody else is doing. And so you're only making decisions based on the consensus, not on yourself. So natural decision, it takes a lot longer to change that behavior, but they have a good framework. They have a budget, take responsibilities, but in order to create their own intention, it takes a little bit of nudging. Then there is crisis transition. Now, crisis transition can be a overlay of each of the story types. Crisis transition is I'm in a situation where I need to make a decision and I'm not necessarily equipped to make the decision, but I need to make the decision.
Yeah.
I.e., my husband just died. I need to make a decision. I'm losing my business. I need to make a decision. Crisis transition is probably the highest level of opportunity and openness for change because they have to change. And so what ends up happening is the propensity or the loss aversion behind this allows them to say, okay, this is really difficult. This is really hard. But if I don't do this, I'm going to lose everything. And so that fear of loss propels them into a position where they have to, quote unquote, burn the boats. They have to commit to this change. And once they commit to this change and get on the other side, it allows good behavior moving forward. So crisis transition. And then the last is strategic optimist. Strategic optimist is the type that their favorite saying would be, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And these types of people are the people that are extremely busy. They value the time. They understand that every single person that they surround themselves in their life, has a specific purpose. They have more intention to what they need to happen. And they're more of rather than a fixed mindset, let's call the natural transition a fixed mindset, which is I am, versus the strategic optimist, which is more of the growth mindset, which is, I am not good at finances yet. And so they're willing to make mistakes. They're willing to put intention. They're willing to change and be wrong and adapt and adjust their leadership. And those strategic optimists are just more comfortable with making decisions. They see decisions as a majority of decisions as two-way doors. They can make a mistake and then they can unwind it, rather than one-way doors where they make a decision and it cripples them forever. So out of those story types, what I've noticed throughout the years is that some people are just not ready to make specific decisions. It's just the question of, is the pain great enough to go through the pain to get where they really need? So
wow, that was great. Those story types can apply to a lot of things, to relationships, to job change, to money. That's really good. And my take is that top one, the strategic optimist is probably the one to strive to be, so that you can move forward with building wealth and just building a better life. Is that something that people who have the other stories going on can shift to?
It is. It's recognizing crystal clear on. I think the author of Subtle Art, Mark Manson, is it's choosing your pain. Like which pain are you choosing, and is it worth that amount of pain? So
Yeah.
it's understanding that there is going to be some type of pain, but choosing the pain that's worth going through, I think, is important. So for the wishful thinker, what they need is data. So they can say, oh, everything's going to be okay. Well, if you have a spreadsheet in front of their face and they're looking at line by line, is it going to be okay? Then it's facts. Like there's truth behind it. They can't hide behind it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this has to do with, it has to do with loss and grief, believe it or not, because they're letting go of their old self. And when you go through these changes where you're letting go of your old self, your circle doesn't want you to change.
Right.
Your circle is uncomfortable with you changing. And so you not only have to kill off the habits that you've acquired throughout your life, you have to kill off your social group dynamics. And that's uncomfortable. And so it all stems with what are the things that I'm willing to let go of, and is it worth it to be there and sacrifice those things?
Yeah, this is super interesting to me. And I love that you're bringing all this to the listeners. We haven't talked about financial investments or strategies or anything kind of nitty gritty in the financial world at all. And yet what you're saying is really the key to everything. So, and again, that's because it's based around your relationship with money and your thoughts and feelings around money and what you do with that. When you bring up decisions, I mean, clearly that's an important thing, to be able to make decisions and move. So, there's the education part that you bring to the table. There's this array of decisions you could make, and I'm assuming some advisory that will help them make decisions. But decisions are super important, and not making them, putting them off, just hoping everything will be great. It kind of doesn't, not that I love a good intention setting. I mean, I'm all about that, but you do have to make decisions. And I think, when I talk to people, they are scared to make a decision because it could be the wrong decision. So, how do you address that? Because I like what you said about being able to make one and unwind it.
Yep. Yeah, I'll share with you a story from another advisor's client experience. There was this woman who was divorced, and recently she was a consultant, fairly successful consultant. And in the back of her yard, she had a pool house. And they decided one time, or just in general in financial planning, we did the math. If you actually were to rent out your pool house, you could create additional income, and then you'd be able to market your consulting business and your coaching business. And the advisor couldn't get past why she wouldn't do it. And it turns out her dog had passed away. I think it was 6 months ago, within 6 months of the conversation. And what we realized is that she didn't want to empty out the pool house, because if you look on the front door of the pool house, there was a paw print of her dog. And so she internally thought, if I did this transition, it's closing the book that dog is no longer with me. So a rational human being would say, why don't we cut out the panel and frame it and then place it right in the room? And that's what we did. And so it's something so small, but it's also so meaningful. And it's understanding that it doesn't necessarily have to do with the numbers. It has to do with the transition and what it means to the person. And so that's what keeps me motivated, is understanding what is the social psychological dynamic that is blocking people. And it could be something as small as a paw print on someone's window door. So I just thought I'd share that.
That's a really beautiful story too. Yeah, and as you're speaking again, I'm thinking of all kinds of things where, yeah, you get tangled up in the emotions of things, and it interacts, or intersects with what you're doing with your money. So, really interesting. Paul, can you tell people how they can get a hold of you and hear more from you?
Yeah. So part of my project is the Business Legacy podcast. And the reason why I do this is because with social media, everyone thinks in shorter time frames where the average person, time and attention is less than 3 seconds at this point. So I really love talking about legacy and leadership and long-term time horizons. So selfishly enough, it gives me an opportunity to learn from others and who think in longer time frames. So if you can visit businesslegacypodcast.com, feel free to listen to any of the episodes that I put up. But other than that, yeah, just listen to the show.
Yeah, that's great. And if people would like to work with you, do you work with people around the country?
Yep, we do. So my direct email is paul@innovativewealth.com, and that's paul@innovativewealth.com. And feel free to reach out and talk and see if we're a good fit.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here today. I think that was a really insightful conversation. I actually want to go back and re-listen because there was a lot there. It takes a little time. You listen to it, but then you want to listen and go back and think about yourself and think about your family and sort of what you've been through and the money decisions you're making and how some of these stories or different things are playing a part in what you're doing. And I think it's great to find a wealth advisor who can look at that bigger picture before just sitting down and saying, here's what you're going to need to retire. And I've learned recently from taking care of my parents that so much of that is unpredictable, really. I mean, you can make some great guesses and do the best you can to estimate all kinds of later things, but there'll be surprises. So I think it's great to have this deeper understanding around yourself and money to be able to handle that with some flexibility and some resilience, actually.
Ultimately, the question that I ask after every interaction is, did I make this person's life better? So because we've had experiences where someone's portfolio is up double digits, great. You have an extra $2 million this year. Well, lockdowns are happening. I can't go to concerts. I can't see my grandkids. So, at the end of the day, if I'm not answering the question, how do I make this person's life better? Then, what was the interaction for? So,
yeah. Well, thank you. I think you're the type of wealth advisor people should have. And so I so appreciate you being here, sharing all of these great insights and stories. And listeners, thank you for being here, listening to the Money and You Show. We're always happy to have you. You can find us on all the podcast platforms, on Roku, on the Limit Free Life YouTube channel. And so please, leave us a review, send me a message if you're interested in learning anything new or hearing something different on the show that we, get new guests, all kinds of things. You can reach me at Michelle@limitfreelife.com. That's 2 L's. And check out limitfreelife.com, see some of the free offers there and see a little more about what Limit Free Life does. And check out Paul Dio and his Business Legacy podcast. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.